Hey everybody, wake up. This is Wake Up with Mark Joyner, episode number 96. This is the 30-day morning person challenge, day 15, and today I will talk to you about why I am trying the carnivore diet of all crazy things. Okay, so first off, before I say trying, let me tell you I have been on it for probably around 9 months now. Now, before I get into how this works and how I do it, I want to say a few opening things. All right, so there's a gentleman, a new friend of mine that I met, who's an F-15 pilot from Malaysia. He sent me a message asking me about this, for some thoughts on the carnivore diet, and I thought maybe I should just turn this into a video so anybody who has questions about this can come to this as a resource. Maybe you guys have more questions, by the way. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Facebook. Any of you guys are watching on my Facebook personal profile, so that's facebook.com/Mark Joyner personal. I'm going to open that tab up right now, and I'm going to look to see if you guys have any questions there, and I will answer those questions. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to give you guys a little spiel about this, some of my general thoughts about it, the pros and the cons of it, why I'm doing it, and then after that I will look at the comments here and see if you guys have any questions. All right, so first off, what is the carnivore diet? Carnivore diet is unlike, I'll tell you what, if someone had told me 2 years ago that I was going to try this, I would have said, you are out of your mind. There is no way this diet could possibly be healthy. There's no way it's going to work. It's going to make you sick. It's going to clog up your bowels. I had all of these preconceived notions about what this diet would do to me. So basically, you're eating only animal products. That's the base foundation. Now, there are a lot of different variations of the carnivore diet, and there are different people out there who are experts promoting this. I'm going to give you guys two resources you can go to from people who are far better studied on this thing than I. One is you can look up a gentleman named Dr. Sean Baker. He is a doctor, I believe he is an orthopedic surgeon, and he has been on the carnivore diet for about 2 years now. He is also a supremely good athlete. He has a world record on the Concept 2 rower, and he is at 55 years old, able to deadlift 550 pounds. That is an amazing, amazing accomplishment, okay? That is not trivial. Next, I'm gonna tell you about this group out in Hungary called Paleomedicina. Paleomedicina. They are using the carnivore diet to, according to them, effectively treat all manner of gut and autoimmune conditions. Now, a lot of people out there believe that some of these different various gut illnesses that people have and various autoimmune conditions that people have are all connected. They are all more or less different manifestations of the same-ish disease. How is that possible? How is it possible that all of these different diseases are possibly the same? Well, in science and medicine, the labels that we attach to different maladies, to these different collections of symptoms, are constantly evolving and changing. Often we mistake the label for a malady as an actual thing. We don't really know. We don't really know. Our knowledge is constantly evolving. And by the way, this is a fundamental thing. I want to talk about this here in a second about there's a fundamental misunderstanding that most people have about the nature of knowledge and the nature of science. So before I talk about how I do the carnivore diet and my general thoughts on it, I want to speak a little bit about the epistemological, and scientific nuts and bolts that we need to understand before we can even have this conversation intelligently. Now, many of us are walking around with all sorts of dogma about diet. There are people who believe that it is settled science that veganism or a whole food plant-based diet, goes under many different names, is the optimal diet for human health. I call bullshit. I don't believe that this is settled science. I don't believe that there is such a thing as settled science. I think that anybody who uses such a phrase, in my estimation, I am sorry, has immediately disqualified themselves as an intelligent commentator on science. You do not have to look deeply into the history of science to know that often very, very closely held truths are overturned by new revelations. I'll give you a couple of very recent examples. There was a time there where Lamarckism was a biological theory of how animals change, which was based on the notion that the behavior of the animal would change the outcome of the progeny. Now, this was disproven by Darwinism and the work of Gregor Mendel and all of the geneticists who came after them. And then the notion was that no, it is only through natural selection, and the mechanism through which this happens is genetics. That it is all variations of the genetic code. So any animal that is born with a specific genetic trait, if it was more survivable, that trait would tend to live on and proliferate throughout the communities. Now, for the longest time, and I mean decades upon decades, Darwinism had overturned Lamarckism. It was almost universally agreed that Lamarckism had been debunked. Now, this was, in fact, it was so strong that the notion of genetic determinism is referred to, by I believe it was Watson and Crick when they, discovered DNA as the actual, building blocks of the genetic theory. That there was such a thing as a central dogma, and that was that, everything in humanity was determined by your genetic code. Well, then, several decades later, there is this new field called epigenetics, and we discover that the genetic code does not describe everything. In fact, after the Human Genome Project, we were quite stunned to find that there were only about 25,000 or so genes identified, which baffled scientists because we thought that there would be one gene per different protein in the body, and we had identified over 100,000 proteins, so it didn't add up. And then we're starting to find that there is this thing called the epigenetic code. Okay, this is a set of markers that exist outside of the genetic code, and these are switches that can be flipped on and off, more or less, by your behavior. So your environment and what you do to yourself, everything that happens when you're alive can change the state of these switches, and you can pass on these switches in a changed state to your children. Okay, check it out. You Google this and look into it. This is not controversial at this point. This has been very well established, as so far as I know. I believe that we have found through multiple generations of fruit flies that they were able to change epigenetic markers, and that those changed states would be changed in, they'd flip the switch in one direction, and then all of the progeny from that point forward would have that switch in that direction. They would take one of the children multiple generations later, flip the switch, and then all of the progeny from that point forward would have it in the flipped switch state. Okay, this is huge. And what this means is that Lamarck was somewhat vindicated. All right, so this is but one of many, many, many examples of how our knowledge changes radically, and about how some of the most closely held beliefs that we have are overturned with new understandings. So if you are walking around with this notion that X, Y, or Z is settled science, I really got to tell you that you have to think way more deeply about this than you are, because the scientists that are telling you stuff like that something is settled, frankly, I believe they're totally full of shit. Think about it. They cannot know this, because what it means is they are presupposing that they know everything there is to know about the universe, and that they have figured out all of the exceptions. They haven't. They haven't. Okay. By the simple fact that we are constantly revealing new things, and radically surprising things, by the way, I'll give you one more example in a second, should tell you that anybody who says something is settled in science is either pushing an agenda on you, or they're not that bright. Okay? Or, and I hate to be rough like that, there are very bright people who just are not thinking that deeply about the grand historical perspective of science. We need to load that into our minds to understand these things properly. So I know that some of you guys are going to watch this and you're going to feel very threatened by the carnivore diet because someone told you, some authority figure told you that X, Y, or Z is the optimal diet for humanity. And that you're going to question whether or not this is a sane idea on my part. I question whether or not any of us can know. Okay. Anyway, we'll get back to diet here in a second. Let me give you one more example. Another classic example here is that we believe everything to be understood about the chemicals, the atoms, and the molecules that make up the universe could be expressed through the periodic table. But what we are finding now through the nanomaterial revolution is that if you take the periodic table, it's almost like there's another periodic table behind it, and another, and another, and another, and it might go back infinite degrees. We don't know. And the one very famous example of this is the material called graphene. It's where you take a carbon molecule, you strip it down to 1 atom thick, and the behavioral properties of that are completely different from carbon. It's 100 times stronger than steel, 1/10 the weight of steel. It is close to functioning as a room temperature superconductor. We can do all sorts of amazing things with this material, and there is a patent war that's been going on for the last 10 years or so between the United States and China to get dominance in graphene. But graphene is but one example. There are many, many other examples in the nanomaterial world, and there are perhaps an infinite number of these yet to be discovered. So if the notion that Darwinism is now being challenged, the notion that Darwinism is the be-all, end-all, that the central dogma of geneticism is being questioned, and if the notion that the periodic table itself describes everything there is to understand about the material world in terms of how atoms and molecules interact, if that's also being questioned, don't you think our notions about what is healthy and what affects our bodies one way or the other should also be questioned? How can we possibly know that? And the nanomaterial stuff is very relevant because it's possible that there is all sorts of stuff happening at a nano layer inside of our body that has just not been identified yet. And some of this stuff could be very central in determining our sickness or health. So we don't have it all figured out, guys. So have an open, totally open mind with all of these different notions out there about diet. And it's also possible, by the way, that diet is conditionally affected by your whatever situation it is that you are in your life. So one of my favorite joinerisms that I like to put out there is that causality is not binary. It's multivariate, meaning there are multiple variables that will determine whether something is causal or not, and it is also conditionally dependent. So it's possible that people of certain genetic types, right, or racial heritages will perform better on one diet or another. It's also possible that it's way more complicated than even that. Maybe it's partially blood type. Maybe it's partially dependent on what you're doing with your body. There could be, loads upon loads of different variables that could affect this. We don't know. It's also possible, for example, that the people for whom the carnivore diet is working, that it's just an elimination diet. That's one of the criticisms that people have about the carnivore diet. It's very possible, okay? But there are also some anomalies going on here that I think are very, very important to point out. I don't think elimination explains all of the phenomena of the carnivore diet. And by the way, if you are a vegan and you're watching this, just understand that there are people who claim that any health benefits people get from veganism are also from elimination. Because people often go from eating a standard American diet full of junk food to one of these other more extreme diets, often with more natural ingredients. I would think that people are going to do better on veganism or carnivore than McDonald's. Okay, that would be my guess. So it's possible that there is an elimination component in all of these things. It's also possible that the people who are having autoimmune conditions have maladjusted microbiomes that do not have the bacterial content required to process different types of food. That is altogether possible. We don't know. The microbiome is also this, very, very new field. Up until recently, we thought that there were only about 8 or so strains of bacteria living in the gut. Now I believe we have identified upwards of 20,000 plus, right? So, by the way, the number of cells in your body that are human and are foreign, meaning that they are other organisms, your human cells are outnumbered about 9 to 1 in your body by foreign cells. What role are these foreign cells, this larger global microbiome that doesn't just exist in your gut, but also exists on your skin and your eyes and your ears, everywhere, your entire body, throughout the outside and the inside of your body, these organisms are there. To what extent are they affecting health? And is it possible that people who are thriving on one diet or another have a different microbial population that would allow them to thrive under different conditions? We also don't know that. Okay, now, let's talk about why I did this. Okay, so I have had gut issues that have been multiply diagnosed, from everything from just having a straight ulcer to to ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, IBS, all of these different things, and this has been going on since I was a teenager. Okay, no doctor that I've ever met has ever been able to offer me any solutions. Okay, they have tried all sorts of different protocols, many different drug treatments, and the drugs to treat these things, by the way, were primarily there to mask symptoms. They weren't addressing the underlying causes. Now, I've gone to naturopathic doctors as well who have put me on all sorts of special diets, diets where they would do food sensitivities testing and tell me to eliminate all of the red and yellow zone stuff, eat only in the green stuff, and then supplement with all of these different probiotics and all of that, all sorts of different protocols to change the content of the microbiome. None of that stuff worked either. I tried veganism at 2 different points in my life. While I was a vegetarian for 1 year while I was in the Army. I was in the Army for about 8 years. 1 year there I was a lacto-ovo vegetarian, meaning I was eating only vegetable and fruit products and grains and things like that. Also, but supplementing it with a little bit of milk and cheese, lacto-ovo, and also eggs. Okay, that's where the ovo comes from. That didn't work too well for me. Many years later, I tried the actual hardcore vegan diet. I was on what was known as 80-10-10. This is where you're eating, fruit all day, and then you have a salad in the evening, more or less. It's simply put. There's a little bit more nuance, but that's the general idea. I did that for about a year, and it kind of messed my body up. Frankly, there are a lot of people who've been on 80-10-10 who have ended up with hormonal disturbances and all kinds of balances. In the beginning, it helped my body quite a bit, but over time, I started to deteriorate. So I don't recommend that. Now, maybe there are some people out there that I know who claim to be doing quite well on 80-10-10. So be it. If it's working for you, it's working for you. I don't have any dog in this fight, nor do I have a dogma. I believe that we should all be a little bit kinder with each other on these things, and that we should not walk around with the presupposition that our view of diet is the one and only right one. Again, I don't think that is an intelligent thinking man's position on anything in science. Okay, the reproducibility and predictability is the hallmark of a good theory, right? There is no theory yet that is that reproducible or predictable, so far as I know, in diet. I have not observed it. There are I've run across many people claiming that X, Y, or Z would have very, very predictable results on different conditions. I have not seen it in myself, and I have not seen it in other people as well, nor have I seen it really well represented in the literature. There are people out there who are on the vegan, whole food, plant-based side, and they will tout things like the China study and all of that. Well, I would say that that is an interesting epidemiological set of observations, failed to control for certain things, right? For example, they weren't distinguishing, what types of meats were involved. Where was the meat sourced, right? Was it fed grass or was it fed grains? Was it from a fast food diet or what? And there are a lot of other studies out there that showed, they show a strong correlation where meat eaters were sicker. But what they weren't distinguishing was, well, are these meat eaters that are eating a natural meat diet, or are these guys that are eating McDonald's? Most of the literature that you see out there does not control for this stuff. So therefore, I question it very deeply, and I question people who take it that seriously. There is competing epidemiological work. If you look into the work of Weston A. Price, his epidemiology is, I think, very much rivaling the China study. I thought that his stuff was more compelling. What he found was that people eating traditional food that is not processed, right, that included certain things like fermented foods and naturally raised produce and animals, things that were not injected with hormones, things that were raised in harmony with nature, that by eating these foods, people would tend to live a lot longer. And that he found this, by the way, by going out and studying populations of centenarians. These are people who live to be over 100. Now, there was a similar study of centenarians called the Blue Zone diet that came up with a completely different conclusion. Those people said that the people who were living to be over 100 were all vegans and vegetarians. But I think that the Weston A. Price data is in stark contrast and conflict with that. Now, when I went to the Weston A. Price side of things, I tended to do a little bit better. Okay, when I combined that with a ketogenic diet, I tended to do better still. It still did not resolve my problems completely. Now, by the way, I've experimented with ketogenics for many, many years now. I even wrote a book called, How to Lose a Pound a Day. Probably this is, about 15 years ago now, which showed how I used a ketogenic diet to lose weight. So I was definitely about a decade or so ahead of the trends in trying that out. In terms of weight loss and physical performance, I believe that it is pretty well established that it's effective. You can look into that yourself. There are people who question it. My personal experience and from people that I have observed and guided through doing ketogenics have all done very, very well in terms of fat loss and an increase in mental acuity and an increase in mental performance, but you've got to go through an adaptation phase before you get there. Now, all that said, none of that stuff completely resolved my gut issues. So I heard, from Dr. Jordan Peterson, who is, an interesting academic from the University of Toronto, who has been quite the iconoclast for standing up against, Bill C-16 in Canada. I believe that's the name of the bill. That was his big claim to fame, and now he is one of the most celebrated intellectuals in the world. Well, he and his daughter have both had autoimmune conditions for many, many years. And his daughter, who has had to have joint replacements and went through manic depression and all sorts of issues, completely cleared it all up with the carnivore diet. And Dr. Peterson completely cleared up his severe depression that he had with the carnivore diet as well. Now, keep in mind, Dr. Peterson is a psychotherapist. Well, I believe he's not a psychotherapist. He is a clinical psychologist. I'm not sure of what modality he uses in his clinical psychological work, but for a guy that is very much in that direction of hey, I'm going to treat depression and mental illness with psychological interventions rather than physical ones. And this, by the way, is the distinction between psychologists and psychiatrists. Psychologists use psychological interventions primarily. Psychiatrists are also medical doctors who are able to prescribe you drugs, and then they're the ones who are giving you Prozac and all this stuff. So when a guy who is completely on the side of psychology is telling you that a nutritional intervention cleared up his depression, this is a pretty interesting statement. It's a very interesting statement. Now, was one anecdotal case enough for me to consider it? No. I mean, I considered it seriously at that point, but I had to look in and find out more. And that was when I found out about paleomedicina, Dr. Sean Baker, and a lot of the other people who have been experimenting with the carnivore, some of whom have been doing so for upwards of 10 years now. Now, since switching over to carnivore, my gut is not completely healed, but the conditions that I have had the symptoms have greatly reduced, far more than anything else I've tried. Okay. Now, keep in mind, I haven't been as strict as perhaps I need to be. You know, I've had a couple of cheat days, you know, here and there, like once a month or so. You know, I've had a couple of, like, you know, straight up junk food cheats, you know, where I eat some, like, you know, cheeseburgers and ice cream and crap, right? It's possible that I have not given my gut enough time on strict carnivore to heal completely. That could be why it hasn't worked completely. It could also be that maybe no matter what I do, it won't work. There are people who are doing carnivore for gut health issues who are saying that it takes about 3 months or so of very, very strict carnivore, of beef only, by the way. That is the strictest form of it. Anyway, there are some who are saying that it takes about 3 months of that to get full and complete remission on any kind of gut issues that you're having. Now, by the way, I should also mention that you know, I had some joint issues, and I still have, you know, various joint issues, but the problems or the symptoms have also greatly reduced since I switched over to carnivore. All right, so there are some people who believe that, you know, rheumatoid arthritis and other forms of joint conditions are also autoimmune diseases, right? And that these things are, you know, if you have a gut issue and you have rheumatoid arthritis, that those are different manifestations of the same thing. Now, by the way, I was actually diagnosed with arthritis at some point. This was about, goodness, I think over 10 years ago now, by a military doctor, and they were telling me I needed to stop you know, doing exercise. I've been told that by several medical professionals, right? Well, here I am at 50 years of age today, and I'm pretty freaking jacked and ripped and generally pretty healthy, a lot healthier than the average guy, especially for my age. Okay, now, and by the way, when medical doctors tell you, you know, you should stop moving, or that, you know, at this point forward, you are going to have this experience for the rest of your life, if I were you, I would question that. I would seriously question that, because I think that that is also going to plant an idea in your mind that may manifest in the form of illness. Okay, there's the placebo effect, which is the notion of, you know, perhaps an inert substance that we believe will work is actually going to cure us. And then we have the nocebo effect, which is the opposite, and that's that something isn't going to work or is going to make us sick, and that this is an observed phenomenon, by the way. Okay, you can trick the body into sickness or health with placebos or nocebos. All right, so I believe that a lot of diagnoses that we get are probably having a nocebo effect on people's bodies and are making them sick. I am very fortunate in that I was unwilling to accept their prognosis for me. I thought, well, if that's the best you've got, and your only answer is that you're going to give me drugs that are going to mask my symptoms and also simultaneously make me sicker, which is what many of the drugs prescribed to people with autoimmune conditions are doing, well, then screw you. I mean, why should I listen to your advice? I mean, I have zero motivation now to listen to your advice. All you have offered me is doom and gloom. So why would I accept that? Why would I accept that? So I said, no, I'm not going to accept that I should not exercise anymore. I'm not going to accept that my joints are going to slowly deteriorate and fall apart from this point forward for the rest of my life. I'm not going to accept any of that. And I'm not going to accept that there is no cure for anything happening in my gut, and that I will simply have to accept your symptom masking drug that is making me sicker as the only way to treat that. No, I reject it completely. I absolutely reject it. If that's what a doctor is offering me, I think I am perfectly well within my rights to question the sanity and intelligence of that doctor. If that's the best they've got, and they discourage me from trying anything alternative simultaneously, right? No, I'm going to try alternatives. If your option is, you know, misery and death soon, and my other option is, hey, there are a whole bunch of other people saying I don't have to accept that path, I'm going to listen to these guys, because if I listen to you, I'm going to get sicker and die soon anyway. So why would I listen? Okay. Now, I have also, throughout my carnivore journey, I've experimented with different things. You know, for example, I've had a few, you know, carnivore cheat days where I would eat some salami and cheese. Depending on the lactose content in the cheese, my gut would handle it, you know, better or worse. I tend to do better without it completely. This is why, you know, I'm primarily on beef. And by the way, the beef that I eat now, I am eating in an almost raw state. This is kind of a strange thing. So I dehydrate it. I have a dehydrator that keeps it at a temperature that is not high enough to destroy the enzyme content of the meat. I think that's probably going to be a healthier way to consume meat. It would, seem axiomatic that if you are eating meat that has the natural enzymes intact, that your body is going to be better off processing it than meat that has been traditionally cooked and has all of the enzymes completely destroyed. Because I believe it's around 117 Fahrenheit-ish. Google this on your own, where the enzymes are destroyed. And if you want something medium rare, you got to get up to about 135 in the center. Okay, so that means by definition, a medium rare steak has all the enzymes destroyed. Okay, so when I eat this dehydrated beef, I've noticed that I do even better still. All right, so what I need to do at this point is I need to get a solid 3-month period of eating just that and have only water to see if, hey, maybe I can go into complete remission in my gut. But what I can tell you is I'm extremely grateful for the symptomatic reduction that I have experienced so far. I don't have scurvy, all right? I'm not taking vitamin C supplementation. This is something to also load up into your mental RAM and consider with all of this information. For the longest time, we believed that people would get scurvy if they only ate meat, or if they didn't eat fruit, if they didn't get extra vitamin C. The carnivores are hypothesizing that the reason why carnivores are not getting scurvy is because perhaps when you eat grains, your daily requirements for vitamin C goes up. And if you're only eating meat, your requirements are low. Now, this actually jives quite well with one of the criticisms that people have made of Dr. Sean Baker. I hear there are a lot of whole food plant-based people that say, or vegans or whatever they want to call themselves, say, well, Dr. Sean Baker but his blood is terrible. His blood work is awful. He's got low testosterone. That was the big argument. And I thought, really, okay, so this is your big debunking of the carnivore diet. This guy's physical performance is off the charts. He broke a world record on the Concept 2 rower, and he's deadlifting 550 pounds at 55 years of age. Maybe your notion of how much testosterone we need in our body is what's broken, right? Maybe that is also conditionally dependent. Maybe if you were eating a carnivore diet in the same way that you seem to be able to function better on lower levels of vitamin C, perhaps you can function better on lower levels of testosterone. Again, conditional dependence, right? We have no idea what's really going on here. But to come out and say, well, his blood work is bad, the level of testosterone is low, therefore we have shown that the carnivore diet is going to make you sick. To look at the number and then ignore the reality of the expression of symptoms and human performance I believe is just a very, very simplistic way of looking at these things. How we can even say that is absurd when we know that for the longest time we thought that total cholesterol was the big determiner of whether or not you would have a cardiovascular condition, and then they distinguished LDL from HDL, low density lipoprotein and high density lipoprotein cholesterol, and that if you had it, and that it was, no, it's not total cholesterol, you could have high cholesterol, but if your HDL is higher than your LDL, then it's okay. That was another thing. And then that was overturned when they said, well, actually that's not very predictive. C-reactive protein is the more predictive marker for whether or not you are going to get a cardiovascular condition. And somehow, every time the scientific community comes up with something new, some new understanding, this is it. This is the dogma. This is the one that we have to believe. This is the capital T truth. Man, it's really short-sighted. It means that we're not looking at historical context. I just don't know how scientists today are running around saying stuff like that. Again, it just demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of the history of science and of the nature of science in general. Science is not a method for determining dogma. It is a method for exploring and understanding things, and it's exploration. None of the fruits of scientific exploration are to be taken as dogma. They are to be taken as theories, as hypotheses. Sometimes they are labeled laws, but even the laws, it turns out, are proven to have exceptions. We know now that Newton's laws of physics have exceptions when you look at things at the subatomic level. They don't describe the behavior of subatomic particles at all. All right, so even laws are conditionally dependent. All right, so there are still people to this day who would say, well, Mark, it's a law. It's been proven completely. I don't think anything can be proven completely. I think that's an epistemological fallacy from the get-go. Okay, so load all of that into your mind before you make a determination one way or the other, and before you try any diet one way or the other. And by the way, I'm not advocating any diet. The only diet that I would advocate is one based upon natural ingredients. That's the one thing that I have a relatively strong level of conviction on. Why? Because I trust nature with its millions upon millions of years of optimization of our relationship, of our homeostatic relationship with the environment, and it knowing what should be inside of our bodies and not inside of our bodies. I trust that a lot more than the reductionist approach that many of us have been using, so saying, well, we've identified all of these different components that make up diet. As long as you have the components accounted for, you're going to be perfectly healthy, right? And so this has led us to a lot of synthetic artificial foods that are tending to make people sick. I think it's relatively axiomatic at this point that people who in general are eating more natural diets tend to be doing better than people who are eating processed foods. And it doesn't matter which protocol they're on, with a natural diet, it just as a general tendency tends to be rendering a better result. That is as close to any dogma as I will come to. Perhaps we will discover all of the variables of diet at some point, truly, really and truly, and come up with a synthetic food that is maybe even better than anything nature has provided. I don't think we are there yet. I don't think we're even close with some of the new things that we've discovered. Again, just factoring in nanomaterials, what kind of nanomaterial impact is there in natural food that we have not identified yet? This is only recent history, by the way, where all of these different components have been getting, higher and higher levels of nuance. Once we discovered, that there were 3 macronutrients, we thought we'd had it all figured out. It's like, oh, okay, if it's a protein, a fat, or a carbohydrate, that's it. That's all of diet. And then we discovered vitamins, and then we discovered minerals, and then we discovered enzymes, and then we discovered phytochemicals, and then we discovered, the importance of the microbiome. What else? What's the next? And then we discovered that's completely different from what we think now, that will blow our minds and have us go, man, everything that we thought up to this point is totally wrong because of this brand new thing that we just discovered. What is that next thing? I don't know, and you don't know. Okay, and certainly the guys who are running around telling you, waving a finger in your face saying, it is proven, settled science that blah, 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 blah is true. F you, buddy. You don't know. You don't know. All right, so, and my apologies for being a little bit, rough on these guys, but you've got to fight back against this when somebody is being an intellectual bully, telling you, spouting off, all sorts of literature, saying, well, this is proven because of this literature and that literature, and then calling you dumb and questioning your intelligence when you're, not willing to accept their dogma. No, I'm gonna get a little bit back in their face, because I think that if they're coming to me and they're being respectful, and they're saying, hey, this is what I believe now, I'm open to my mind being changed, I'm going to have a lovely conversation with that person. But when they come in and start getting accusatory and start telling me that, X, Y, or Z is dogma and that it is proven, and then they're getting aggressive with me about it, I'm going to get aggressive with you right back, right? Because I don't think that deserves a respectful reply. Now I'm going to check Facebook here and see if any of y'all have any questions about this. Let's see here. Mark, do you know how do we reinforce our nervous system? Kamal Hermes is asking that question. Kamal, what do you mean by reinforce our nervous system? If you could give me a little bit more information about what you mean, I might be able to give you a better answer about anything I know about that. Neil Howe asks, but if you say maybe, nobody will listen. Yeah, that's true to a certain extent. Most people will not. But Neil, actually, someone like me who has been trained, in epistemology and to understand the relationship between language and the universe, about how the map is not the territory and all that. If you've studied general semantics or any of the other stuff that came out of Korzybski and that interesting memeplex of ideas, if you've studied epistemology, you are going to have more respect for somebody who says maybe, okay? Because that means, to me, that's a signal that they are more thoughtful. But yes, from a persuasive standpoint, saying maybe is not very persuasive. So that leads me to the question, what are we trying to do here with our statements about diet? Are we trying to persuade people that a particular approach is true, or are we trying to discern the truth? I am trying to discern the truth. In my exploration of diet, I am not trying to persuade anyone. Now, I am a marketer, I am a persuader, I use my persuasion skills, but I use them parsimoniously. I use them in certain occasions when I'm trying to accomplish certain things. I don't think that approach has any place in science or in scientific discussions, and I refuse to accept the notion that the larger population as a whole is unable to understand these things. I've just flat out refused to accept that. I think that everybody is perfectly capable of understanding science. I think it's simply a matter of giving people the correct education. In fact, I think we are causing psychological harm to people and damaging minds when we are not teaching them the epistemological foundations upon which they should be building their knowledge set. I absolutely reject the notion that we should treat people like idiots. And I don't think that's what you're saying, Neil, by the way, at all. I just want to get that out there. So Neil asks, where do you get your beef? Well, right now in Thailand, the only source of grass-fed beef that I have that is reliable is to get imported beef from New Zealand. Now, here's a shortcut for you. If you want grass-fed beef, and I think that the literature is pretty solid on that, the omega-369 profiles of grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef are starkly different. If you have grass-fed beef, the omega-3 content is much, much higher. If you eat grain-fed beef, the omega-6/9 is greatly higher than the omega-3s, and this is likely to cause inflammation, as I understand it. Also in New Zealand, they're not injecting their beef full of hormones or putting pesticides and stuff on the grass. Okay, so this is why I get New Zealand beef. I would rather personally eat something locally grown. I think that there are some interesting arguments about eating local. The great Paul Chek has argued that perhaps there are microbiome benefits that you would get from eating things that are local. That locally raised things may be conditioning you to be able to handle I should just say pathogens in your environment, in your local environment, and that if you eat stuff that was raised far away, that it is not perfectly optimal for that particular reason. So that is why I use that particular approach. Now let's see here. Neil Howe, unable and unwilling are two different things. You are quite correct with that, sir. Okay, guys, this looks like all of the questions. I didn't see a follow-up here from Kamal. Kamal, if you watch this later and you want to clarify your question, I would be happy to answer that. Anyway, that's it for today, guys. I know that was quite a long one. I wanted to get that data dump out there. A lot of people are very curious about why and the how of the carnivore that I'm doing. And if you guys have any questions about this, feel free to put them in the comments, and I will make a point of coming back. I'm not always on top of my comments. I don't have time to be on top of it, but for this particular thread, I will be vigilant about it, and I will watch, because I'm quite happy to share all of the knowledge that I've amassed about this and my experience thus far, and I hope that it helps folks one way or the other. All right, you all have a beautiful day, and I will